Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This week I am going to be sharing a what we eat in a week video. I know you guys all love these, and I actually love watching these types of videos on YouTube as well. It always gives me so many different meal ideas, or even if I don't have the same dietary preferences as somebody else, it still gives me some really great ideas because I find that I get into a routine of kind of making the same things over and over again, and I love to switch it up. So on this very first night, I'm actually going to be making enchiladas, and so the first thing I'm getting going is some bone broth because I'll need some bone broth to make my enchilada sauce, and I always save all of my bones from the chicken that I eat and also all of our veggie scraps. So if I'm peeling carrots or little cores of onions or anything like that, I just put it all in Ziploc bags and I freeze it, and then I just pull them out, add them to my Instapot, add in some water. I always add a little splash of apple cider vinegar because that really helps to pull out more of the nutrients in the bone marrow to make the bone broth even healthier. Add in some seasonings, and then I put it on the soup cycle, and it cooks at high pressure for 240 minutes. And every time I make it this way, I always get nice gelled up bone broth with all those nice good nutrients from the bones. So anyway, I'm getting that going earlier in the day. This is actually on a Sunday. Typically, we go to my parents' house on Sundays, but on this particular week, they are out of town, and so I had to cook on a Sunday, which is rare for me. And we were trying to think of something that was a little bit different and exciting. All of my family loves enchiladas, and I happen to have everything that I needed to make that, and so that's what I decided to make for dinner. So for the enchilada sauce, I'm actually just following a recipe that I found on Google. I'm using some oil and flour, and then I add in a bunch of chili powder, a little bit of oregano, and some garlic and salt, and then I will mix in the bone broth. I am doing 4 cups because I'm doubling the recipe. You'll see that I have lots of things going in my kitchen today. I'm also getting a loaf of bread going because I'm going to be using that for a different meal later on in the week, and I'm also have the bone broth going. I'll have plenty of this after I make my enchilada sauce so I can make things with broth throughout the week as well. I am making beef enchiladas because that's what I had. I've made chicken in the past, but I didn't have any chicken, or I didn't have any chicken to frost it. I had chicken in my freezer, but I thought the beef would go a little bit faster, so I'm adding some onions into that to saute, and then a bunch of spices, like all types of Mexican, like taco seasoning, and then I'm also adding in some salsa, and that'll be the filling for my enchiladas. I had some corn tortillas left over from a few weeks ago. I made something with corn tortillas. I can't even remember what it was, but I had a bunch of those left over, and so I'm using corn tortillas for the shells. You could also use flour tortillas. My family definitely all prefers corn over flour. They did kind of break apart a bit. I don't know if you can tell when I'm making this, but it did not look as pretty as like a flour tortilla enchilada would be, but it tasted really well. And then when I got down to the end here and I was getting ready to add in the cheese, I realized I did not have cheese. I was like going through all of my refrigerator, like I know I have more blocks of cheese in here. I didn't. And so I had to switch gears towards the end of this meal. And so instead of making 2 9x13 pans, I only had enough to make 1. And that was definitely not enough for my family, and I knew it wouldn't be. So we had 1 pan of enchiladas, and then we had a whole bunch of that meat with the salsa and the beef and everything still made up to make a second pan. So instead I used that as like with chips as a dip, and we ate up all of the meat. I had a bunch of avocados, and so I made up some guacamole and just like slices of avocado. So once everybody had a couple of enchiladas inside of the corn tortilla, after they got their enchilada, they got chips to dip into the meat with avocado. It worked for us to fill us up, but unfortunately, I did not have cheese. We had sour cream, chips, salsa, avocado, everything, but not enough cheese to make 2 pans. So Anyway, it still worked. It was delicious. Everyone was filled up at the end of the meal. And that's honestly the biggest thing. Sometimes you make things that maybe people don't love as much as other things. Sometimes the plan changes right in the middle of making a meal. That happens to me all the time, actually, like way more than I'd like to admit. But the job of getting my family a meal and their little bellies filled and energy to get through the day was the only agenda, and that did get finished. All right, so after I got the enchiladas in the oven, I decided to do a cleanup. This was such a mess. I had the Instapot out. I had bone broth that was like leftover. I had extra enchilada sauce. I had a huge mess in the kitchen, so I did a quick cleanup even before I served dinner. A couple of videos ago, I talked about doing the dishes by hand and not using the dishwasher, and I had so many comments about that and people just not really understanding how it could be faster. I don't know. This is just the way that works for us. And if you see here all these dishes I have, my cast iron skillet, my Instapot, I don't put these things in my dishwasher anyway, mainly because I'm going to be using them again so soon. And also I just feel like it would just like fill up the dishwasher completely with just pots and pans. So this is still the systems I'm using. All right. So night 2, I am making sloppy joes. And I did not have any ground beef defrosted, which is why I decided to make sloppy joes. Anytime that I don't have meat defrosted, I have to think of something that I can use ground beef for, and my kids love sloppy joes. Now with this, I'm also going to be making some French fries, and my daughter had made a Caesar salad earlier, so we're going to be also serving the rest of that with the sloppy joes and French fries. Now, you guys are probably getting so sick of watching me cut up onions. I swear every single meal that I make starts off with onions and garlic. I probably don't even cut onions right. You guys are probably like, why does she cut onions that way? I don't even know. I cut up seriously probably 3 onions a day because I put it with eggs in the morning. I put it with my lunches. I put it with dinner. Does everybody else use this many onions? Just me? I mean, every single time I go to the grocery store, I buy bags of onions. We got a bunch of onions from my sister because she grew a bunch of onions from my aunt. And so it's just, I don't know. We use a lot of onions in this household. Maybe not everybody does, but it is like my go-to. When I go to start dinner, I just grab on an onion and start dicing it, and then I figure out later what I'm making. So needless to say, I'm adding in some onion to this meat. I am cutting up my French fries, and I am using some lard. That is another thing I get asked a lot of questions about, the lard that I use. This lard actually comes from the hogs that we raise ourselves, or from my sister's hog. Whenever you get a whole or half of a hog at the butcher, they also offer you a tub of the lard, which is just the fat that comes from the pig. Same goes for beef. When you get your beef from the butcher, either in a half or a whole or even a quarter, you'll be offered the tallow. I am a firm believer in animal fat. I think it is so good for you. We use it to fry up everything. Lard is also really great for baking. You can render it yourself. I do find when I render it myself, I can never get it as good as they get it for me. And when I render it myself, it's not as tasty in baked goods because I feel like I can still have that like pig taste or smell. But when I get it from them, they are so good, from the local butcher where we live, that it works out great even for baking. Now, if you don't have lard available to you and you want to buy it in the grocery store, the main thing you want to look for is making sure that the pig or the cow is eating a non-GMO diet. That's going to be the healthiest lard for you. So depending on where you get it, that's kind of the things that I look for. I also use lard to make a lot of our skincare products, and I use it in making soap bars. I have recipes for all of that stuff on my blog. So if you're interested in using lard, or you have a bunch of lard to use, check out my blog. You can make lotion with it. You can make body butters and soap bars, and it is so good for your skin. And it's also very healthy to use in cooking. Now, like I said, yesterday I made a loaf of bread, and so for this I used some bread and I made basic like open-faced sloppy joe sandwiches, topped them with cheese, threw in the oven and let that cheese melt. And so we had that with the fries fried in lard and then just sprinkled with a little bit of salt and then some Caesar salad. All right, friends, I'm going to take a quick moment to thank today's video sponsor, Element. Element is a tasty electrolyte drink with everything you need and nothing you don't. Element is formulated to help anyone with their electrolyte needs and is perfectly suited for those who are following a keto, low carb, or paleo diet. I personally love Element because it has no added sugar, it is gluten-free, there's no artificial ingredients, and there's no coloring or fillers. When you sweat, the primary electrolyte lost is sodium, and when sodium is not replaced, it's common to experience muscle cramps and fatigues. Element can help prevent and eliminate headaches, muscle cramps, fatigue, sleepiness, and other common symptoms of electrolyte deficiencies. My whole family loves Element. We all have our different favorite flavors, and we try to drink a cup of it every single day, especially this time of year when we're spending so much time outside swimming, in the garden, riding bikes, playing soccer, just all the different things because we love to be outside. I am doing my best to replace all those electrolytes that we lose while we are sweating outside. Right now, Element is offering my viewers a free sample pack with any Element order, so you'll be able to try all 8 of the different flavors, or you can even share them with a friend. To get this deal, you must go to drinkelement.com/ouroilyhouse. That's DRINKLMNT.com/ouroilyhouse, or you can use the link down in my description box below. All right, so for this third meal, I had some stew meat defrosted, and I actually Google searched, what can I make with stew other than stew? We recently got a big order of beef, and we have so much stew meat, and we do love stew, and I make stew often, but sometimes you get sick of eating the same things over and over again, so I wanted to try to find something that I could use that stew meat in that wasn't stew, and so I found a recipe for steak tips, and you could either serve these with mashed potatoes, over rice, over egg noodles. I decided to do it with mashed potatoes and some gravy. These turned out so good. Obviously, it was still just stew meat, but it was just a way that I could really change up the recipe. All right, so for this recipe, it called for 2 pounds of beef stew meat, 1 onion, of course, obviously I'm using onions, 3 cups of water. Now, I actually used broth because I had so much broth left over from the broth I made yesterday for the enchilada sauce, so I used 3 cups of broth. And then it also called for a 1/4 cup of soy sauce. Now, whenever things call for soy sauce, I typically use coconut aminos. It has a similar flavor, but in my opinion, it's healthier, and so we use a lot of coconut aminos. It also called for 1/4 cup of Worcestershire sauce. I'm probably saying that wrong. It's one of those words that you just kind of like say and hope it comes out right. But anyway, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of ground black pepper, and then it also called for a packet of dry brown gravy mix, which I did not have. So instead, I made my own gravy by adding in a little bit more spices and then adding in some flour. I put all of the meat and the sauces and the onion in my Dutch oven, put the lid on, and I let this slow cook for probably 1.5 hours, maybe 2 hours. The stew meat can be a little bit tough, and if you let it simmer in some juices like this or a gravy, it will get nice and tender. So I was gonna let this cook on low, and while that was cooking on low, I got out my potatoes, and I recently got several potatoes from my aunt. We went to her house to get a ping pong table, and while we were there getting the ping pong table, she gave me tomatoes, she gave me cantaloupe, she gave me potatoes, and I had a bag of organic potatoes that were starting to sprout. So I'm using those first before I get into the potatoes that she gave me. So I'm just washing these and peeling these for my mashed potatoes. Now, I always give my chicken my potato peels. And I had someone comment on a video once telling me that potato peels were toxic for chickens. Have you heard that? I have no idea. Honestly, I feel like it can't be true because I've been giving my chickens potato peels since we've had chickens for 10 years. And I don't know, am I killing my chickens? I've never noticed any issues with this. They do eat them. So anyway, I am just putting all of my scraps here in my little metal bowl, taking them out and giving the scraps to my chickens. Who knows, maybe I'm poisoning them, but this is what I do. It's never been a problem. Let me know if you ever heard that before, but people tell me that. So you never know. You get comments here and some of the comments are like, wow, I never thought of that. That's such a great idea. And other ones I'm like, is that really true? Because who knows? Anyway, so after I give all the scraps out to my chickens, I am boiling my potatoes, straining them off, adding in some milk and butter, and mixing them up. I am the worst with a hand mixer. Maybe it's my hand mixer, I don't know, but every time I use it, I make the biggest mess. Even if I put it on the lowest setting, I have things splatter. So I just do the best I can and clean up later. Anyway, I stirred this with a scoop of mashed potatoes, put the beef tips on top, some of the gravy. This was delicious. Everybody in my entire family loved this meal. All right, so this next meal, we are making a pork chili and cornbread. A couple of different reasons we are making this today. One, it is a random cooler day. We have all the windows. I had the sunroom door open and this cool weather was like, you know what? Let's make some chili. Two, we have so much sausage because we recently got back our hog and I got it all back in sausage and bacon. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna make a pork chili. Spoiler alert, this stuff is delicious. We have the recipe on our blog, so I'll link it for you guys down below. If you ever are making chili, you want to substitute beef for sausage, try it. It is so good. And the third reason, we are having over a few of my sister's boys today to play with some of my boys, and her oldest boy absolutely loves chili. He is just, I don't know why he loves chili, and I've heard him talk about it so many times. And so whenever we decided to make them, like, this will be perfect because her son is coming today, and why not make something that he absolutely loves? So, and of course, it's a very easy thing to make for a crowd. I'm going to be feeding 9 kids today instead of just 6, plus my husband and I, so a big pot of chili. I'm also making some cornbread. Will go a long way and it'll be easy to serve. And so I thought that would be the perfect meal to make today. Now, I have a bunch of fresh tomatoes and some of them are starting to go bad, or just not really bad, just they're getting soft. It's time to be using them. So instead of using canned tomatoes, I'm just going to dice up a bunch of fresh tomatoes to put into my chili. Anytime you use fresh tomatoes, they have so much juice. So I'm actually transferring these from my cutting board to a bowl because it wasn't quite time to put them in the chili yet, because I'm still browning the meat and the onion and the garlic, and it was like dripping off my cutting board. So I'm gonna just put those in a bowl, set them aside. I do have canned beans. Sometimes I use dried beans, but I had canned beans, so I'm using that. But I definitely need to use up these tomatoes. Now, I was also told from some YouTube comments, several people actually told me that I should leave the tomatoes on the counter, and I'm wondering if that's why they got soft quicker, is because I put them in the refrigerator. I always thought that if you put them in the refrigerator, it would kind of slow them down and keep them longer, but I need to look that up. But maybe that is actually something that, you know, it's better to keep them on the counter than in the fridge. So either way, I was using them. I got to use almost all of them up, and so nothing went bad, but maybe in the future I should leave them on the counter instead of putting them in the refrigerator. I'm also adding in some of that broth. I mentioned that I love getting my family as much broth in our diet as we can because it's so good for you, has so many nutrients and benefits for your body. And a lot of times that for me just looks like me making just a big pot of soup. But if I can find other ways to get it in, I will. So this week using it in the enchilada sauce, using it in our gravy, and now I'm using a bunch here in my chili. I'm also adding in a can of tomato sauce just to make it a little bit more liquidy. It was super delicious. And then I'm making some cornbread. We also have this recipe on my blog. It's a very simple recipe where you just do corn flour and some regular flour, lots of butter, milk, and a little bit of sugar. And I just cook this right in my cast iron skillet. It's nice and like fluffy, crumbly cornbread. We love it with butter and honey on it. It's like a cake. It's like tastes very desserty. So good. So anyway, that's what I'm making for lunch today. And then I am topping this with some cheddar cheese and sour cream. All right, for this next meal, I am making some shrimp nachos. I actually got this idea from a friend. I have a friend, actually I have several friends that I've met through the whole like vlogging YouTube world that we actually meet up once a year in like real life. We all don't live close together, so like once a year we'll go to each other's houses. And we have a new friend that I have never met in real life that's going to be coming this year, and so I wanted to watch one of her videos on YouTube to kind of get to know her before we have this meetup that's actually going to be happening in October. And a couple of my other friends and her had did like a collaboration video. Anyway, long story long, my friend made shrimp nachos in one of her videos. You guys are probably like, where is this going? But anyway, she made shrimp nachos and I'm like, that looks good. And one evening when I was sitting down, actually it was like after bedtime, my husband had went to bed this night. Actually, he didn't feel well one night this week. And so he went to bed early. All my kids were in bed and I laid down to just like on the couch with a bowl of ice cream. And I was watching one of my friend's YouTube videos and she made shrimp nachos. And I was like, I am making that for dinner tomorrow. So here I am the next day after watching that video, making shrimp nachos. These were so good. My kids have keep talking about them. One of my kids, my daughter, was not home the night I made this, and my 5-year-old, when she got home, she was at her grandma's house. He was like, you should have stayed home. We had shrimp nachos. They were so good. And he was like bragging about them to her. So definitely gonna have to be making these again. It was just some shrimp. I made them in a little bit of oil in my cast iron skillet with some taco seasoning. I did like chili powder, garlic, salt, black pepper, some onion, and like sauteed them in there. And then for the nachos, I just did cheese on top of chips. I put the shrimp on there, warmed it up, and then when it came out of the oven, I topped it with lettuce and tomatoes, onions, our date sauce, that's like sweet chili date sauce. I've talked about that a lot on here. If you guys want to try it, look up the Date Lady. It is so good. This is like my favorite stuff. There's actually a local store that sells this close to us, so I buy it all the time, but you can order it online too. The Date Lady, it's so good. So anyway, top it with all your favorite taco toppings. Now I knew that wouldn't quite be enough for us, so I made an extra bag of shrimp and just put it on the table. The ones that I put on the nachos were already peeled and the tail off, but then I had a separate little cast iron skillet of another bag of shrimp that I had in the freezer that actually had the tail on. I just put that on the table so that the kids could just peel it and eat it, because my kids are obsessed with seafood, like all seafood. They love sushi, they love crab, they love anytime that we go to the beach, they're like, highlight is going out to eat and getting fresh seafood. These kids have expensive palates, I swear. They do not like weird kid foods like macaroni and cheese that you would think like all kids love that. They don't like. They like shrimp and sushi and like crab and lobster. Like seriously, kids, come on. But anyway, they ate a bunch of shrimp, and I knew that one bag that I made for the nachos wasn't going to be enough. It was actually a forethought. Like after I already had the nachos made up, I was like, that is not going to be enough. I know it. So I got another cast iron skillet going with some more shrimp, and of course they ate every last bit of it. All right, so this last meal that I'm going to share is a honey garlic steak, and I'm making it with rice. Before starting lunch today, I'm actually cleaning up the kitchen. I like to have a clean kitchen when I'm cooking, and I feel like the kitchen counter is kind of a catch-all. You'll see here while I'm cleaning, I find a kid's book, I find toys at my feet, I find a pair of socks. Why is there a pair of socks on my counter? I'm like, children, I don't know. Things just always, I always am saying, someone's, whatever it is on my counter. I call it my counter because the kitchen is like my domain. It's my area, and I like it to be clean when I start cooking. So starting off here, I'm getting things cleaned, and then also my brother-in-law brought over a bunch of milk. My sister lives really close to me, and she has a dairy cow, and they got a little backed up on milk, and we typically go there every week to get milk, or a couple times a week, but we missed our normal day, and they needed jars, and she texted me, she's like, Luke's coming over to bring you milk because we don't even have enough jars. Like if we milk this morning, we won't have anywhere to put it. So he came over, brought me a bunch of milk, 5 gallons actually, which was amazing. And I gave him a bunch of empty jars so that they could milk. And so I'm getting some yogurt going. Anytime they have milk that maybe is a little bit over like a week old, I'll make that into yogurt. It's still totally healthy and fine to drink, but it doesn't taste as good fresh. And so that's going to be yogurt. So I'm making 1.5 gallons of yogurt because that's what my Instapot will hold. And then I'm rearranging and cleaning out the refrigerator to get the rest of the milk in there because we have, that's a lot of jars and I have to kind of move things around to get the milk in. So after I got the kitchen all clean, the yogurt going, I am getting lunch going. This is actually a rare day where my husband is not going to be home for lunch. He is out at our new property working on the high lift that we have out there because we're doing a lot of dirt work. It's actually my dad's high lift and it has something leaking on it. I don't know. So my husband's fixing that. He is mowing. And so I am making lunch for just me and the kiddos. And I am making a honey garlic steak and rice. So for this recipe, I am using sirloin steaks and I am just cutting them into about 1-inch cubes and I am sprinkling them with about a teaspoon of smoked paprika and some salt and pepper, and then I'm just setting that aside to make my sauce. Now for the sauce, I'm using a couple tablespoons of avocado oil. It calls again for a few tablespoons of soy sauce, so for this you could also use coconut aminos, and then it called for 1/4 cup of water. I again am using broth because I have still some more broth in my refrigerator. 4 cloves of minced garlic, 2 tablespoons of honey, and then it called for a tablespoon of sesame seed oil, which I did not have, so I just did an extra tablespoon of avocado oil, and then a tablespoon of rice vinegar, a little bit of dried oregano, and then it called for a tablespoon of cornstarch, which I used arrowroot powder instead. I mixed all of this up, and then I heated up a little bit of oil in my cast iron skillet, put some of the steak in the cast iron skillet, and then poured the sauce on top of the steak. I just let it cook for about a minute or two. I always like my steak rare, so I didn't want to overcook it. I added some more of the sauce on here and let it kind of thicken up a little bit. Then I just removed it from the heat. Now I am serving this with rice, and so instead of making my rice in water, I am again using that broth. I like to do that a lot because that's a great way to make rice a little bit healthier and to get some more broth into your diet. And so I'm making my rice, and then when I am done with that, I will just be serving the steamed rice on a plate and then pouring the meat and gravy or sauce over top of the rice. This was really delicious. All of my kids really enjoyed this. They like all different types of cuisines, and I guess this is more of kind of a Chinese maybe type of meal. Very delicious, and again, just another way to use steaks rather than just the traditional way of just grilling up or barbecuing a steak. So anyway, that was our meals this week. Obviously, some of these were lunch, some of these were dinner. When I do these types of videos, I try to just film one meal in a day. Clearly, you're missing our breakfast and the other meals. Sometimes we have leftovers. Sometimes there's a whole other meal that I make, but this is just the ones that I chose to put in this video. Not all of our meals are elaborate. Some are simpler than others, but it just, the ones that I try to give you guys a good sample of the different things that we eat. We typically stick to a meat, a vegetable, lots of potatoes, homemade breads and broth are kind of the things like staples in our home. So I hope this gave you guys some great meal inspiration. And if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button. I get out a new video every single week.